So Michael Philpott, Senior Practice Leader with Ovum's Consumer Services team. Could I just get a show of hands of those that are either telcos or in the telco business? Okay, so good audience. So, and me too. I used to come from BT 18 years ago, and since then, the role of the telco in the consumer space has significantly changed. But Ovum predicts that going forward, the disruption is only going to increase as those OTT players, as I've been talking about, and others throughout the day, increase their strength on both the mobile devices and in the home. However, it is imperative that telcos really do keep that customer relationship and remain relative to the consumer if they are to continue to be successful in their wider businesses. And within this presentation, I've just listed 4 strategies that I believe that telcos should adopt to remain relative to their consumer base and to continue to be successful. The good news is that the telco have never been so important to the consumer, or at least the networks are. When I was a child growing up, we have one single device connected to the telco in the home. That was an analog telephone. I used it perhaps once or twice a month, perhaps because I was forced to call my grandparents or some aging aunt. But roll forwards to now just a few years, and all of a sudden we're connected to the telco from the basis when we open our eyes till we go to sleep. If you take a pay TV service, there's 33% chance that you are taking that service from a telco, something that telcos could only dream about 20 years ago. I remember doing demonstrations with BT where we were first demonstrating IPTV over DSL networks, and we never really dreamt that telcos were going to be so successful in the TV space. 60% of all broadband homes by the end of the year, and that's almost 900 million broadband homes around the world, will have some kind of OTT video service, and that's not including applications such as IPTV player, 4OD, etc. So broadband networks and mobile data networks have really transformed the way that we watch video content. 63% of our music revenues and 88% of all gaming revenues flow over these broadband and mobile data networks. And we've become so obsessed with our smartphones, and these stats have come from the US. I could only find these stats from the US, but I'm sure that all countries follow similar trends. We spend 45% more time on our smartphones than we do speaking to our spouse. We spend 100% more time on them than we do with our own children. So the world is going digital, and everything digital at some point touches the telco. And it's quite easy to forget sometimes just how big the telco industry is, with all this talk about Amazon and Netflix and digital advertising, etc. And we sometimes forget that the consumer telco business in the end of 2017 was worth $1 trillion. That's bigger than digital advertising, pay TV, digital games, smart home, OTT video, and digital music all put together. So is this death of the telco, which we seem to have been talking about ever since I joined Ovum all those years ago, has it been over-exaggerated? The issue is, of course, as you've been hearing in many presentations already, is that the growth in those telco businesses is now starting to stagnate. Ovum predicts that that market in the consumer space is only going to grow by 6% over the next 5 years. Where, of course, compare that to these other areas where on average, so that's on average across all those different spaces. And as Ed's been saying, the growth around pay TV isn't that great. So you can see that in some of these spaces, the growth is significant. 44% in average over the next 5 years. And telcos, of course, would love to move into those growth areas in order to keep their consumer revenue businesses going. But of course, that's where they come up against those pesky OTT players, which Ed was saying is so difficult to compete against. You can see that the capex to revenue ratio of a telco is significant compared to the OTT players. And that just enables them to be a little much more nimble, much easier for them to go into new areas and new countries. So as I was saying before, the telcos have really already completely changed their businesses. This graph shows the typical makeup now of a large converged operator operating in a developed country such as Western Europe. And you can see that even over the last 5 years, they've gone from generating 50% of their revenues from those traditional communication services such as voice and messaging to 33% today. So 60% of their revenues now come from broadband and content, largely TV services. And that's going to continue to change over the next 5 years, whereby 2022 they'll generate 80% of those revenues from digital. And so the telcos have successfully changed their businesses, and that's driven growth still. The issue is that the majority of that growth largely comes from broadband and mobile data services. And the issue is that over the next 5 years, that rate of growth is going to decline. You can see from the charts here that shows the rate of growth of both mobile data and fixed broadband, that by 2019 onwards, all growth in all regions will start to go into decline. So by 2022, the question is, what's next for the consumer? How can they continue to grow their revenues once those data revenue streams have started to stop? What is the role of the consumer in the future with all these different OTT players, and that will be present both on the mobile device and in our homes? Strategy number 1 will be to develop a best-in-class broadband network. The networks are still the telco's key assets, and differentiating around quality of experience will certainly be a differentiating competitive advantage to any telco. But this is not about just competing between telco and telco. By delivering a good quality experience on those broadband networks, it also enables them to play in different digital spaces. Consumers won't accept new applications and services from telcos if they're not able to deliver a first-class quality experience on their own broadband and mobile data networks. So what do we mean by quality of experience? Well, yes, it's certainly about speed. As an industry, we've taught the consumer that speed equals quality. And certainly when you start talking about services such as HD definition and Ultra HD, etc., you certainly need speed to deliver those services into the home. And so we've certainly seen a lot of investment continue to go both into the core and the access networks. By 2022, Ovum estimates that 40% of all homes around the globe, including those emerging markets, will have speeds of over 100 megabits per second. 18% will have over 500 megabits per second. But it's not just about speed, or at least speed alone. Coverage is also extremely important. No longer do we only connect to the telco through a single device, and we have multiple devices, and we want to get access to those networks wherever we are, both inside the home, outside of the home, and also as we commute to work and in the office as well. So it's about just getting those speeds wherever we are and whenever we want. So coverage is extremely important. It's also about having zero impact on those applications. I was listening to a speech by Gavin Young, who's the head of networks at Vodafone, just the other day, and he was explaining that their aim is to have an invisible network. The consumer doesn't realize there's any network between that device and the servers of the application that they wish to access. And that's about having very low latency and zero packet loss. So it's also about having good customer service. The customer or the consumer doesn't really think about customer service all of the time, but when they need it, they want a fast, they want a very reliable solution. And so we'll see a lot of greater automation going into the networks, and this idea of having zero touch, so the networks dynamically change and alter to deliver the type of applications and services that consumers want whenever they want them. This focus on quality of experience, Ovum believes, will definitely strengthen the telco's role in the home, and that should lead on to new opportunities and new service revenues in the future if the telco takes advantage of that role. There's no point really investing in your access and core networks if you don't also invest in the consumer's home network. And so we've seen, probably for the first time ever really, telcos really starting to invest in this part of the network, delivering really advanced Wi-Fi hardware into the home. This improves the quality experience of those consumers in the home and enhances the telco's own satisfaction scores. But it's not just about new hardware. Operators are investing in data analytics software, which enables them to get a much more detailed picture of what's going on in the home, which improves their own efficiencies and leads to operational reduction in costs. Then they're starting to add on AI technology because they want this to be dynamic. They want not just in the home, but across the whole of their footprint. They want to make sure that they're continuing to give a great quality of experience and enable those networks to flex and solve problems and before the consumer even knows that they have a problem. So with this type of investment, and then as we've heard from Mariana, the increase of IoT technology going into the home, this starts to open up new opportunities for the telcos if they have invested in this type of technology to start with. What this enables them to do is start to look for new types of service and applications. For example, a telco could introduce a whole home IoT security type service, protect the whole home for any type of malicious activity that those telcos can spot. And then that enables them to offer a monetizable type of application down to the consumer, a new type of service that they're able to offer on top of their broadband services. In future, you have things like new blockchain type technology, which I know there's as many questions about as there are answers, but it does open up some interesting type of new ways of monetizing services through, for example, smart contracts, both on the vendor side for a B2B type monetization model and on the B2C as well. So with the strengthening in the role of the home, together with new technologies that aren't quite there yet but will come in the future, it does start to open up new opportunities for telecommunication operators. Strategy number 2, though, will be to continue to explore new digital service opportunities. Where to invest, though, is becoming quite a challenging question to answer for those telecommunication operators. Companies like Ovum, of course, have got lots of forecasts and data tools to try and help them with that. But putting it into context is really important. And Ovum has developed this context model which starts to plot all those popular digital consumer applications and services and puts them into context, both in terms of their size, their growth, and also the telecommunication operators' relevance, which is shown on the y-axis there. So this type of tool starts to help operators identify opportunities that they haven't yet tapped into. So just an example of that, you can see that the digital gaming market is actually quite large compared to digital music, OTT video, and even smart home, but remains relatively untapped by the telcos to date. But with new trends around esports and new technologies such as 5G coming along, is that something that the telcos could start to take advantage of in the future? The important thing for telcos to understand and recognize is that this picture changes on a country-by-country basis. Those circles will grow and shrink and move around the graph as we go from one country to the next. I've just got a couple of examples to show you how that works, but if you're interested in talking to us about this type of modeling and type of data, then please come and find me in the break and then we can talk about it in more detail. But I've just got a few examples here. So if we go to Germany, and then the UK, and then Spain, and Brazil, you can just see how those opportunities do differ, and it's very important for the telcos to really understand so that they can pick out which areas they should be investing into. Strategy 3 will be to develop converged solutions so you can maximize those opportunities. The graphs here show that the consumer is definitely going more mobile in nature. You can see all those growth areas are much more mobile in terms of their application. But what I would argue is that what's important is that the telcos are converged to maximize those. For example, most telcos that have been successful in the OTT video space are those ones that are already successful in the home around pay TV. You can see here just an example, and this is the States, which I know is an extreme example because the telcos have become under such heavy competition from those Netflix and companies like that. But you can see how they've successfully adopted OTT applications to at least protect their customer base, if not also grow it. And operators around Europe are now starting to adopt this model, develop their own OTT applications so that they can maximize the investment that they've made in that content, and not just on their broadband networks, which typically were in the region of about 10 million homes, but to their mobile footprint, which go into tens of millions of homes. So strategy 4 will be about becoming a smart aggregator, but also at the same time a smart investor as well. Telcos have been extremely successful at bundling services together. This has clear success KPIs, both in terms of reducing churn as well as increasing their consumer ARPU and increasing their satisfaction scores along the way. But new bundles going forward will have to become more flexible. You cannot possibly sell a single bundle of services to all your customers. You try selling a bundle of fixed voice, broadband and TV to my 17-year-old son. He would just never, ever buy that type of service. He probably wouldn't even take from you a mobile service plus Netflix because he's got no interest in Netflix either. So what this means is that you have to come up with either a wider range of different types of bundles, or you have to move to a more flexible type of solution where consumers can pick and mix the applications that they want to bundle together. This leads on to the fact that telcos must develop a wider range of partnerships, because what's become imperative is that you cannot longer invest in one area of the bundle just to prop up another one. You cannot invest in one type of service simply to reduce the churn in TV or broadband. That business model just no longer works, and the financial sector will just not accept it. So there's no way that telco can invest in all these areas, so they have to partner in some. The complex thing becomes is, where do we partner and where do we invest? Because if we just partner across the whole of our service portfolio, then all we have is vendor partner brands going out towards the consumer. The telcos have to invest to differentiate their own brand and bring value to the consumer to maintain that relationship. And that is not easy, and the most important thing is that you have to understand what those partner strategies are. I've just charted here telco innovation going up the y-axis versus the OTT partnership, and you can see that telcos are increasingly partnering as they're innovating, and increasingly with these big companies across here. Now, the mix is making those partnerships, because as we heard from Mariana earlier today, to a certain extent around smart home, you've got no choice but to partner with companies like Amazon and Google, for example, in that area. But what's important from a telco point of view is that you've got to understand what their wider business is, because increasingly they will become a competitive player in not just the smart home, but also in the pay TV and other sectors as well, pushing the telco further and further back into that broadband corner, which, as you can see, they're all quite happily willing to partner with you there. So understanding that is what is important from a telco point of view, so that you can find those areas where you can invest and you can generate a decent return on investment on that investment. So, in summary, the role of telco in the future will be about creating a best broadband experience on your networks, and those networks becoming increasingly invisible. But because those networks are becoming invisible, where you do touch the consumer, whether it's the broadband router or the pay TV service or your customer service call center, you really have to shine. Your brand has to shine. It has to shine very brightly. And providing customers with a range of digital applications through converged networks will maximize your revenues, maximize your consumer ARPUs, and allow you to take advantage of those new services that come around both in the home and outside of it. And being a smart aggregator is important because you cannot invest everywhere. And that does suggest that the future for the for the operator will become more of a B2B C type of strategy. However, it's imperative that telcos maintain the consumer relevance, and therefore you do have to invest in areas where you do believe that you can bring value down to the consumer and allow your brand to shine. Thank you.